Now, Lekoil has raised $50 million on the London Stock Exchange and is now the fourth oil and gas company with significant operations in Nigeria listed on the LSE. To discuss the listing and Nigeria's oil and gas space, I'm joined on the line from the USA by Lekoil Akinyomi. He's the CEO of Lekoil. Thank you so much, Lekoil, for joining us, and congratulations on your listing. So you were able to raise $50 million. It seems like the appetite for Nigeria's oil and gas space is pretty robust at this stage. Can you just talk us through your thoughts at this time?
Thank you very much, Wally. Yes, we're obviously very thrilled to get the deal done, $50 million, like you said. There's quite a bit of interest in Nigeria, I would say, from the perspective of investors, institutional investors, both in the U.S. and in the UK. Having said that, you still need to do a lot of work. So I will classify the investors into two groups.
Right.
You have investors that have already invested in Nigeria. They're comfortable with the country. They understand the issues. They've been able to deal with, the perceived risks, so to speak. And then you have the new investors who are sort of, kind of dipping their toes in the water for the first time where Nigeria is concerned. And
Right.
we've had to handhold a couple of people like that, get them over the line.
Well, it certainly seems like some people are taking the plunge at a time where we're seeing quite a few of the international oil companies exit out of Nigeria, divesting from assets. I know that your company also tried to acquire some of those assets. Can you just speak to your plans for growth, given the opportunities that are evolving as a result of the divestments from oil and gas assets in Nigeria?
Thanks, Wale. The way we see the listing from our a lot of my previous career, covering global energy and natural resource companies. One of the things you see is that what is going on in Nigeria is not new. You've gone through in the Gulf of Mexico. You've seen the majors divest, move to deeper waters, created an opportunity for independence. We saw the same thing in the UK. And to some extent, we're seeing that in Nigeria now. So it's a window of opportunity, but one of the differentiators will be access to serious capital, especially equity capital, and that's why we do the listing.
I was just going to get to that point. I think capital is the big thing that many of the local investors in the oil and gas space are struggling to acquire. I think the banks can only do so much, and clearly, like you mentioned, equity is important for many of these projects. How much equity do you anticipate will be flowing towards Nigeria? Because clearly there is money out there to be invested.
I think over the next 5 years, it shouldn't be hard to attract equity in the billions of dollars to Nigeria. The issue, though, Wale, is structure. Many of the companies that we've interacted with, some of them we've advised, you need to have the right kind of structure to attract international money. You need to have the transparency. You need to have the right corporate governance. And you need to have a strategy that will make an institutional investor comfortable to put money in a company.
All right. I think one thing that makes many investors uncomfortable is this whole issue of the petroleum industry bill. It seems to be dragging. I like to say it's stuck in Parliament. It's something we've been talking about for a pretty long time. So how, if you can address some of the issues, particularly as it impacts a local investor like yourself in this petroleum industry bill as presently constructed?
Well, what we've found out is that there are quite a few iterations. So rather than dive deep into it, the way we've dealt with it, Wale, is to run our economics on a pre-PIB basis. In other words, we're running our numbers as if the PIB doesn't happen, and then we run sensitivity around the, some of the issues in the PIB. And to tell you the truth, because we're an indigenous company, most of the iterations of the PIB have actually favored us as an indigenous company. And we've been able to explain that to our investors to say, base case, no PIB, we're getting very good returns. PIB comes in, most of the scenarios actually increase our indigenous company.
Right.
And that makes them comfortable.
All right, interesting point there. Okay, I know you're also invested in other parts of Africa, Namibia in particular. Can you talk to your expansion plans across the continent, and how does the Nigerian opportunity differ from what you're seeing elsewhere?
That's an excellent question. Thank you very much. So we have a couple of assets in Namibia. They're in a different phase of the asset life cycle, exploration in new basin. But we're focused in Africa. We can't do the whole continent at the same time, but we're starting with sub-Saharan Africa. And what we're doing in terms of differentiation, a lot of the assets in Nigeria um, fall into either producing or near production assets, except for the ones in the Dahomey Basin. In the rest of Africa, you tend to take more risk on the technology side. I mean, on the geological side and on the technology side, but sometimes a little bit less risk. In terms of just the working environment. So you balance it out a little bit.
Right. Okay. If we can come back to Nigeria, and I want to get your thoughts about the emergence of the indigenous players. Some people have suggested that over the next couple of years, the market share is going to increase dramatically, perhaps maybe to closer to 40%. I don't know your thoughts about that, because we're beginning to see quite a few indigenous players become big players in this market, producing as much as 100,000 barrels per day for some of the deals that we're seeing recently.
Uh, that's a fair point. I mean, I wouldn't put a number to where the market share is going, but definitely, I think the backdrop favors indigenous players. So we have indigenous access, but you have to marry that with technical strength and again access to capital markets. In other words, as an indigenous company, we have to aspire to be as good operationally as the major oil companies. Then our local knowledge can be advantage, and that's the only way we gain market share. Otherwise, we're gonna push into some resistance.
Well, I know it's a tough terrain, especially with all the uncertainty around the petroleum industry bill, but best wishes as you tackle this market. Thank you so much for joining us. Lekoil is the CEO of Lekoil.